Does God use street preaching or open air preaching? So many times I and others have been out preaching, and a well-meaning Christian will ask us, what fruit do you see from this? Well, as we've said before, the key question is it biblical? Is it biblical? And I want to point you to a quick passage in Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet in Scripture. In Jeremiah 17:19-23, God told the prophet Jeremiah to go and stand in the public gate, through which the kings of Judah come in and go out, as well as in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say to them, listen to the word of the Lord. You see, the city gate was a place of cultural, economic, and political exchange. It was highly trafficked. A highly trafficked place. Look at Genesis 19 with Lot and the angels in the square. You know, Lot tells the angels, don't stay there, because he's concerned for their safety, because there's a lot of people out there. They'll see him. You know, they will see him. And so this is the place where everyone would sell their goods, you know, sell their produce. This is the place where rulers would come and make speeches. You know, this is where the people were. The public gate was the downtown of the ancient world. And God didn't tell Jeremiah just to go into the church and preach. You know, the religious establishments, there weren't churches, but religious establishments to preach. But specifically to the public outdoors. And I want to give you, so it is biblical, and I want to give you a couple of stories about it. In 1915, there was a young man of 17 years old. His name was Iden, and Iden was walking alone, and he heard a man preaching on the street. And this nudged him to walk into a nearby church where he heard Matthew 11:29 read. Matthew 11:29 says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." He said this made him greatly disturbed. Again, later he found himself walking and heard a man preaching on the corner. The preacher challenged his hearers to confess their sin to God. It was at this time that Iden did exactly that. Who is Iden? We know him as A.W. Tozer. A.W. Tozer. Saved by the influence of a street preacher. In 1970, another teenager saw a group of Christians on the lawn of his school singing hymns, as unbelievers would mock and laugh at him. And there was a youth pastor leading the group. The youth pastor stood up on the lawn with Bible in hand and began to preach. One line stood out to the young man among the other lines. The line was, "Jesus said, you are either for me or against me." This struck the teen as a hard thing to hear, because he's always seen Jesus as a historical figure, not as an ultimatum, maybe more as an option. The young man found himself coming to know Christ that very day. His name was Greg Laurie, now the pastor and speaker for Harvest Crusade's well-known evangelist. Personally, I've run into at least a couple people that said they were saved as a result of street evangelism, and particularly street preaching. We had wrapped up our open-air preaching one night in Texas, in downtown Fort Worth, and we were packing up, and as we were walking back to our cars, we passed a young man by himself handing out half sheets of paper, and they were tracts that he'd made. I stopped to find out that it was a tract and hear his story. And he said that he'd recently been saved and was out sharing his faith. He asked who specifically preaches a few blocks down the street on our corner, because he wanted to meet the man who he used to mock and heckle before he was a Christian. Because there were so many of us, we couldn't tell who he was talking about, but God used the preaching of the gospel, and he'll use you. Woe to us if we do not preach the gospel.